nossa reserva. 2 anos que a gente estava lutando para preservar isso aqui e agora vem uns baderneiros e pica fogo na nossa aldeia. Se não bastasse a Vale matar nosso rio, matar os nossos fontes de vida, agora vieram e puseram fogo na nossa reserva. Nós não vamos nos calar. Amanhã nós vamos fechar a pista e queremos a mídia aqui para nos defender.
And of course, the world media has heard her and others like her, an Indigenous woman crying as her home in the Amazon burns. It is a story that ran all summer, and the fires are still burning. But are they really as unusual as they say they are? And is Brazil's President Bolsonaro really as bad as they say? Well, one of our guests, whose family lives in the Amazon, says he is. But there are so many sides to this story, so let's get started.
Now to the global crisis, the Amazon in flames as the world watches. Wildfires in the Amazon continue to burn at unprecedented rates. This could be dire, they say, when it comes to climate change.
Record fires are blazing in the Amazon, raising concerns among environmentalists and world leaders.
The rainforest produces about 20% of the planet's oxygen, and the environmental disaster is causing an international outcry.
In 2018, there were more than 40,000 fires. Already this year, there have been 74,000. That's an increase of 84% with 4 months of 2019 still to go.
The record numbers of fires are a result of record levels of deforestation.
This isn't an act of God. It's farmers and ranchers intentionally destroying the land for more development. And they take their cue from the president.
The so-called Brazilian Trump, Jair Bolsonaro, took over as president in January.
Bolsonaro's administration has already overseen historic levels of deforestation, rolling back regulations on protected areas in the Amazon and slashing the budget of Brazil's main environmental agency by 24%.
Bolsonaro is a climate change skeptic who believes the Amazon should be opened up for business. As fires continue to burn through vast areas of the Amazon, international criticism of Brazil is heating up.
French President Emmanuel Macron has been vocal over Bolsonaro's response.
Macron tweeted, "Our house is burning. Literally, this is an international crisis."
President Bolsonaro has rejected a $22 million aid package to tackle the fires, claiming that Brazil is not a colony of Europe.
O que está de olho da Amazônia? O que eles querem lá?
On respecte votre souveraineté, mais attention, ce sujet de la forêt amazonienne est celui de la planète entière. On ne peut pas vous laisser tout détruire.
And that is a subsidiary but still very important part of this story, the fight between Brazil's president and the French president. And it has got really nasty. Look at this tweet, for example, a Bolsonaro supporter posting, "Now you understand why Macron is persecuting Bolsonaro," and posting this unflattering picture of Brigitte Macron, who at 65 is 28 years older than Bolsonaro's wife, Michelle. Well, Bolsonaro himself replied on Facebook, "Do not humiliate the guy, ha ha." It's kind of petty, really, at that level, world leaders, and we're going to get back to that in a moment. First, a quick introduction to our guests. At the top left there, we have Stephen Eisenhammer, who is a British journalist who's been reporting from the Amazon during the crisis. We also have Diara Tucano there, and she's a Brazilian activist whose family lives in the Amazon and is joining us from Geneva. And finally, Nelson Franco Jobim, a Brazilian journalist who's been to the Amazon several times, on one occasion for 4 months, and he's joining us from Rio. Stephen, I'd like to start with you. The Indigenous woman at the top said, "I want the world media to focus on this." And they did for a while. They seem to have taken their eye off it at the moment for other domestic issues, but the fires are still burning, aren't they?
Yes, that's correct. The fires are still burning, and they'll keep burning in general until the rains come. So September is still part of the dry season, and we'll see those fires continue to burn throughout September. It's quite tricky to work out exactly whether they're getting worse or better. There's quite a large variable from day to day on the number of fires in the Brazilian Amazon. So it's quite difficult to work out the trend. You've got to look at about 7 days or 10 days to get a feel of whether things are getting better or worse.
Stephen, as we heard in that report, we've heard over and over again that these fires are unprecedented. But you know what? The data set that those headlines rely on only go back to around 2013. So it is true that they are, since 2013, the worst year. And it's correct to say that the number of fires has jumped 84% last year. But other data also exists showing fires were much worse 14 and 15 years ago. And that was back when Lula da Silva was in power, who many would say strongly protected the Amazon. Let's go back to Stephen for a moment. Stephen, can you just clarify for us why some people say they're unprecedented and others say actually they've been worse?
So I think that, yeah, they're the worst fires since 2010. That's what we've worked out at Reuters looking at the data. 2010 though was in a kind of exceptional drought. So this year is not technically a drought. So these are very high numbers of fires for a year that is not exceptionally dry.
The main driver here is the so-called unprecedented logging. Is that true?
Yes, I mean fires are usually a kind of a lagging indicator of deforestation, because the land grabbers will go in, they'll clear some of the forest, they'll take out the most expensive wood, and then they'll torch it when it's dry enough to do so, and then eventually turn that into farmland, into pasture land for cattle raising and so on.
Diara, what have people told you, the people who are living in the affected areas, what have they told you about how their lives have been affected?
I actually have a friend that lives in a whole village that was set on fire. It is next to Rio Branco, that is one of the capital of the state of the Acre in North Brazil, and there is a lot of cow landowners there, and they just set the whole village in fire. When you live in the forest, when your indigenous village is in the forest, you need the forest for surviving, and the forest is where all the food, everything people need is in the forest. Of course, the animals were burnt. The whole ecosystem is balanced by that. And these are people that just have lost their houses, their homes, and don't have any support from the government to rebuild everything that is lost. And they are also fighting the fire by themselves.
That must be incredibly difficult in these remote areas. How are they managing to do that?
You have to tap the fire.
Wow.
It's really difficult, because that kind of fire, when it's still burning under the earth, so it's kind of pray for rain and try to open spaces so it doesn't advance more. But in that kind of forest, it's just impossible to fight.
Nelson, you went there decades ago. How does the fires compare when you were going there as a relatively young reporter?
Well, it was in the late 1970s, and I went there, and every time we flew over the Amazon with a column of smoke going up in the dry season. So they were already burning the forest. Of course, now the situation is much worse, because it seems to be a much larger area. In the early 70s, the military regime opened many roads in the Amazon, the Trans-Amazonian Highway and other roads. And that's through those roads that the people occupied some areas of the jungle and started to set us fires to clear land for development.
Well, as our guest and others have said, farmers and mining companies feel more entitled to start the fires because ever since he was elected 8 months ago, Jair Bolsonaro has made it clear business comes first. The only green that President Bolsonaro cares about is money. At least that's what his critics say, but do they have a point? Well, for example, he did choose Mr. Ricardo Salles to be his environment minister, a man who's being investigated for allegedly flouting environmental laws to benefit businesses during his time in government in Sao Paulo. Bolsonaro has also sacked Ricardo Galvão, the director of the government agency in charge of monitoring forest fires. Bolsonaro called the agency's statistics lies. An angry Gaval called him a coward and challenged him to say that to his face. Meanwhile, Bolsonaro's also axed several government departments devoted to combating climate change, making it easier for farmers and loggers to axe the forest. But of course, Bolsonaro did tell everyone during his campaign that he'd prioritise economic development. So, Dayara, put it to you, he does have a mandate from the Brazilian people to prioritise the economy.
And he continues to prioritize his lobby as he did as a federal deputy. The lobbies of Bolsonaro has always been the mining, extraction, and agribusiness. So these are the sectors that have elected him, and where he finds the political support in the National Congress. It is not about the whole economy of Brazil. Of course, agribusiness is very important for Brazilian economy, but at the same time, he doesn't consider the importance to have nature living. The attacks, the dismantling of every environmental policies have been dismantled by his government, and also for indigenous policies. And there is a severe attack on indigenous rights in National Congress. This whole combination is making the deforestation go faster and faster, and these the effects are already felt in the water resources, the rivers, and the increasing of the fire. So the lobby that is really in the target for the Amazon is mineration, is mining, it is exploiting what is under the forest. It has been his speech for years at the National Congress, and now that he is a president, he is just trying to open every way to make it possible.
Stephen, you've been talking to people affected by the fires. Who do they blame?
So I've just got back from a trip to Novo Progresso, which is a kind of frontier farming town right on the edge of the Amazon, where, as Dayara was talking about, much of the issue here is agribusiness growing into the Amazon and constantly expanding. In the town of Novo Progresso, people really blame the government, past federal governments, for a policy that they see as being unrealistic. Novo Progresso was created in the 80s by the military. People were encouraged to move there, to turn forest into farms, to give people opportunities to start a new life. But by kind of the mid 80s, the military dictatorship had fallen. The democratic government came in and changed their view of what the Amazon should be used for, and started pursuing a policy of conservation. So these farmers in Novo Progresso feel very much betrayed and abandoned by the government. They feel strangled by conservation, by the reserves that have been created around the town that mean that there's no land to expand into. And so they see the deforestation and the illegal logging and mining as very much a response to the lack of economic opportunities that they have in that town.
Nelson, I'd like to come to you for a moment. When you look at how Bolsonaro has tried to prioritise the economy, do you think he's actually trying to serve the country or his lobbyists?
Well, I think the economic recovery after the longest and one of the deepest recession in Brazilian history is, probably his main priority. But of course, the question is whether to destroy the forest is a way to develop the country, because they have been doing that for 500 years. And the country is still a so-called developing country. And every government has always put business above the environmental protection. Lula gave an amnesty to loggers. Dilma approved the new forest codes, which gives more amnesty for loggers. The problem with Bolsonaro is that during the campaign, he promised to take the agents off the backs of the landowners. So he signalized that there would be less control of deforestation. At the same time, he believes that Indian reservations, indigenous Indian reservations, are too large for just a few Indians. So he has this mindset of the military government that the forest is an unproductive area, and for the country to be developed, a large part of the forest has to be converted into pasture and soya beans plantations.
Yeah, and of course, as you mentioned, the military, he was in the military once upon a time. Clearly, Bolsonaro has his critics, and they can actually back up some of their complaints, but sometimes in their rush to point fingers on social media, they do get a little sloppy.
All of these people say they care deeply about the Amazon, but they've all posted pictures of the wrong fires. Take Emmanuel Macron and Leonardo DiCaprio. They both posted this picture from the rainforest, but it was taken at least 7 years ago. Didn't bother Justin Trudeau, Canada's Prime Minister, retweeted it. Another, posted by the pop superstar granny Madonna, is 3 decades old. This one from Cristiano Ronaldo, the footballer, doesn't even show the Amazon, but a huge nature reserve in southern Brazil. And it's not just the wrong pictures, but also the wrong numbers. The oft-quoted statistic that there are 84% more fires this year than last is true, but what's usually left out is that there's still only half the number that burned through the Amazon in the middle of the last decade. And then there's the big one, that the Amazon rainforest produces 20% of the planet's oxygen, the lungs of the Earth. Well, this figure is heavily disputed. Other experts say it's more like 6%. Still more eminent voices say it uses up as much oxygen as it produces, with a net gain of 0%. But hey, don't let the facts get in the way of a good story.
Well, that's a very thorny issue. Let's get straight to it with Stephen. Stephen, some people say that the Amazon produces 20%, others 6%, others say, well, actually it absorbs as much as it produces. Which is it in your experience?
Well, I think the main issue, I think that how much oxygen the Amazon rainforest produces is a kind of misleading way of looking at it. It's really about carbon capture. It's really about how much carbon is stored in that vast rainforest. And if you cut it down and burn it, that carbon is being given off and going into the atmosphere.
Yep.
So it's about the emissions that are created through logging, as opposed to keeping it standing where that carbon is stored in those trees and is therefore safe from going into the atmosphere.
That's right. That's the key distinction. Diara, when you see celebrities getting stuck into your business, so to speak, I'm sure you're glad of their support, but when they get it wrong, when they put the wrong pictures out there that are 15 years old or from a different place altogether, doesn't that damage your cause as an activist, as a campaigner?
I believe that is really little mistake in face of what is really happening. And going back to the previous question, it is not just about the oxygen, but about the water. The Amazon River is not just only on the ground in between those trees. The Amazon River is just up in the sky and is one of the most important sources of drinkable waters for the country, and I believe for the world as well. The advance of the fires, the deforestation is a real fact, and it's affecting everyone. And for these photos, these pictures not being like this year accurate pictures, I don't know where they have taken it, because the indigenous movement, for at least, is always sharing what is happening at this time right now. So we have a lot of recordings and photographies every week, trying to tell the world what is happening.
Okay, thank you, Dara. We just want to get to that ridiculous spat for a moment between Bolsonaro and Emmanuel Macron. It all began with this tweet in which Macron called for the fires to be pushed up to the top of the G7 summit agenda at the beginning of August, and he called them an international crisis, which prompted the Brazilian president to accuse him of colonialism. Well, after Bolsonaro commented on a Facebook posting attacking the appearance of Macron's wife, the French president said he hoped Brazil would one day have a president who is up to the job. When the G7 offered money to help fight the fires, Bolsonaro said he wouldn't accept it unless Macron apologized, claiming the Frenchman had called him a liar. Back to Diara for a moment. You're an indigenous woman, but you have Brazilian citizenship, same as your president. Do you feel sympathy for him when he tells the Europeans to stop looking over here at our Amazon? It's not the world's Amazon, it's Brazil's Amazon.
You know, we have this phrase for indigenous nations in all over the Americas that invaders are just the same. He is not indigenous. We as originary people feel all the time attacked. Colonization is not just about that. Colonization is attacking a whole viewing of the planet, a whole relation to the planet. Colonization is the extermination of several hundreds, millions of indigenous nations and cultures. For us, the Amazon is not just a bunch of trees. It is a home. It is the source of everything we know.
So you actually welcome the French president's intervention against your own president?
I don't know if they are much better, the one of the other. I am not French. I cannot evaluate what Macron says, but it's important to value all the forests around the world. The Amazon forest is not just Brazilian. It is in several countries. And I believe, yes, it is important to all countries consider that the rainforest all over the world maintain a big amount of the biodiversity in our world.
Let me go to Nelson for a moment. Nelson, when Bolsonaro says, Europe should basically butt out because you deforested years ago, if you want to do something for the planet, reforest your own areas. He's also keenly aware that some European powers, France and Ireland, for example, might actually enjoy sanctions against Brazilian agricultural products so that they can boost their own sectors. Is that right?
Well, of course, there is this background of the European Union Mercosur free trade agreements, in which Brazil and Argentina have very competitive agriculture. So farmers are worried in Europe, particularly in France, also in Ireland, in Poland, in Spain, in Greece. So when Macron was so aggressive, we believe that he was trying to speak to his domestic audience as well. But he pointed the finger to an international crisis, and I really believe this is an international crisis. On the other hand, this idea of the internationalization of the Amazon plays in the hands of Bolsonaro, because this is our territory, it's our sovereignty, so this is not non-negotiable.
Yeah, and in fact, you said Angela Merkel did a better job when she approached President Bolsonaro directly rather than making a big spectacle of it. Stephen, I'd like to come to you for a moment. Just a final point, really. The remark that Bolsonaro made on that posting about Emmanuel Macron's wife, Emmanuel Macron said, I think that the Brazilian reaction will be to be embarrassed about you. What have Brazilians expressed in that regard?
I think it's a complicated matter. A lot of Brazilians were really quite wound up by Macron's comments, particularly that tweet saying our house is on fire. There is a sense in Brazil generally that people are very resistant, very irritated by international intervention and criticism, particularly around the use of the Amazon rainforest, 60% of which is in Brazil. And Macron clearly kind of set out to irritate Bolsonaro. It was petty on both sides. and doing it just before the G7 as well. A kind of meeting of wealthy nations that Brazil is not and was not invited to. It particularly riles this idea that the international community is going to debate the future of the Amazon rainforest, without Brazil even present, really riles up people the wrong way across the political spectrum here.
Well, Stephen, on that point, we'll end it. Thank you very much for your contribution. Diara and Nelson, thank you also. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. And remember, you can see this and all our previous episodes on our YouTube channel. But for now, goodbye and see you next week.